Hi, my name is Cale and I went to St. Mary's Hall through 2017. Um, I'm queer, uh, probably also prefer gender neutral pronouns, but how I feel about all of this stuff is still, I, I'm, I'm working through it. I'm making this video to talk about my experiences as a survivor, um, and as a survivor and closeted person, uh, from that went to St. Mary's Hall my whole life. Uh, and the only reason I feel strong enough to do that is for all of you that are so incredibly brave and already shared your stories on the Women at SMH page and at Black at SMH page. And I want to make it very clear that I don't want to take up any space from anyone that didn't have the opportunity that I did, which was I could present cis and straight and am white, and so I was safe from a lot of the most overt, sort of systemic forms of discrimination at that school. That school doesn't just let it happen. That in the face of overwhelming evidence that just and also just basic observation of the culture, like they 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 help it happen. They're a part of it. And yeah, I hope that maybe by putting my face and name on this, I can put more pressure on them, maybe. Okay. Um, so, as a blanket trigger warning on my story, I'm going to talk about uh, some themes of uh, like graphic sexual assault, sexual harassment, uh, other physical violence, suicide, and mental health issues. So, if any of that, yeah, that's that's okay. So I went to St. Mary's Hall from the time I was 5, and sort of very early on, I think that if I had an understanding of things either from school or home that like it was okay to be the way I was, it would have helped. When I was a little kid, I found it very hard to identify with like being like a guy and being masculine. Yeah, and I got bullied a lot for that, which is like not St. Mary's Hall specific, but I'll get into that later. But yeah, very early on, like some of my earliest memories of Montessori at St. Mary's Hall is like getting bullied about like liking like the colors pink and purple, and like coming home and crying about that, um, because those were girl colors, and that because I like didn't like, I don't know, sports and stuff, that yeah, I don't know. So around the time that I started like developing and entered adolescence in like 5th and 6th grade, uh, I just like really wanted to be like physically and socially accepted in a way that I hadn't felt before, and so I uh, started to yeah. So in that sort of vulnerable state, like through a computer game, I was playing online a series of like pedophiles and predators reached out to me, and over the rest of my time at St. Mary's Hall, um, less and less so as I got older, but would have me like do things to myself and hurt myself and uh, yeah, and solicit like explicit images and videos from me from the time I was like 12. And you would hope that when you go to school, or that you would, maybe that I would have seen like people with like conforming to the like cis straight identities, like just anything, that maybe I would have a healthier way to engage with like what was going on in my head. But instead, uh, the way I learned about sort of non-cis, non-straight identities at St. Mary's Hall was from talking to my friends, and other guys at St. Mary's Hall, that um, made frequent threats of physical violence against people. For example, it was very common to just sort of declare that, like, if anyone in the friend group turned out to be closeted, that the rest of them would like beat the shit out of him, or uh yeah, like if one of you is gay, like, yeah, I would beat the shit out of you, and maybe I would even kill you. And I had no understanding of like what it could mean to not be cis. So, especially as some of those threats of violence were realized very early on in my life, like beginning in 6th grade when I joined the football team, it was common for me and many, many others to be uh, beat and sexually assaulted with like um like bare genitalia, like shoved in and laid on our face, and sometimes like penetration of things and stuff. And um sort of all of us thought that was normal, I guess, because that's all we understood. That's like, I guess, what you're supposed to do when you're a guy. And so, and this is sort of the I think the first place I should mention this, and just be very clear that I know there were a lot of things in those settings, and I'm sure outside, where I said, did, or was complicit to horrific things. So if you are one of the people watching this video and saw me, or I hurt you directly or indirectly, none of this is an excuse for that. And does not invalidate your experiences. I just hope that by making this video, that like it'll just happen less often in the future, is all. That's all I hope. But because I had no way, and because I was afraid of getting hurt if I ever like even tried to work out in my mind, or like even Google like what type of identity I could like who I could be, the only type of validation I got for any of those feelings inside of myself was from pedophiles. So I like commodified and sexualized my identity, and you know, in many ways that were probably very harmful to other people, like anonymously and sort of privately, like objectified what it was to be like non-cis, non-straight, as like a kink. And that's still, I still have a poor understanding of my identity beyond like sexual, like hyper-sexualized components, in large part because at St. Mary's Hall it is not okay to not be cis or straight. That the people that I went to school with that were much braver than me and lived out in public their true, yeah, like selves, or try to figure out who they were, like in a time where you're supposed to do that in middle and high school. People would threaten physical attacks, yeah, like without telling anyone's story for them. I remember examples of people in my grade and grades above me that were just frequently sexually harassed, verbally harassed, with little to no support from the school administration. And I would hear terrifying stories about meetings these people would have to have with administrators about like the way they dressed, or that they couldn't sort of like be out and about like with significant others, etc. Like all of that stuff culminating to anyone that was young and closeted and going to St. Mary's Hall at the same time I was, that not only is it not okay if you think it's even possible that you're like that, but also like you will just like, not only will you be ostracized, like you could get seriously hurt. And especially for any of us that whose reaction to that rather was like, okay, let me, and this is a lot of what I did was I suppressed it, I sexualized it, and then I joined sports. I worked out all of the time. I tried to become and like hide among the people I was most afraid of, if that makes sense. And said and did like so many terrible and destructive things to people that otherwise I like probably would have been like very close friends of mine, and push the emotional burden of these things on like other middle and high schoolers that were no way in a place to process that. And it has permanently stunted my development. And the sexual harassment and physical abuse did not stop into high school. In locker rooms I was a part of. At one point after a fight, I tried to quit the football team and was forced, if I was going to quit the football team, to divulge all of the details of my harassment, which I didn't give all, but I gave a lot, including some of the sexual stuff. And instead of any action being taken against the season or against any individuals, I was put in a position where some of my abusers were just made to apologize to me face to face, which made me fear retaliation and also made me completely ostracized from the team, and I quit the next year. And most people that I was involved with on that team and I like never spoke again, really. And at the end of my career at St. Mary's Hall, at one point I was the editor of the school paper, and I tried to publish a piece about a kid that was transitioning at St. Luke's, and I wanted to just write and say, wow, isn't it cool that St. Luke's is standing behind their students in the face of like pressure from parents. And I was going to lie that St. Mary's Hall would do the same thing because I was told I had to do that. But then, after upwards of 5 exchanges with the administration about this piece, it was blocked from being published for being too political. Because these identities are not a matter of student safety or in creating an inclusive environment that is safe from predators, from harassment, from discrimination. It's not about that. It is about creating a environment that the wealthiest people from Alamo Heights, Terrell Hills, and Almos Park feel comfortable sending their kids to, at the expense of many of our lives. Throughout this whole time, I did my best to destroy myself, especially when I was younger. I started drinking when I was 14 and started binge drinking when I was 15. I smoked almost every day the first 2 years of high school. I drove drunk without a license. I attempted suicide several times earlier in high school, and later in high school, I just repressed it all and became a very angry and destructive person. And as a result of all of this, I haven't been able to, until very recently, begin to process that maybe it's not just like a kink, maybe this isn't how things have to be, that maybe it's okay if I just am not like a guy, and if I'm just not like interested in women, which are not things that I was ever able to admit to myself, because there was no chance to do that at this school. And this is all from someone that got to hide. I didn't have to deal with other things the class of 2017 did, where I saw and didn't report people that made lists of all of the women in our class, ranking them, even though, like, in middle school, the first time it happened, I knew who did it. I've treated women unfairly because that's what I. There's no excuse for it. There's no excuse for it. And the ultimate message of what I want this video to say is that it's time for St. Mary's Hall to reckon with the fact that none of these are isolated incidents. That this is something that is actively allowed and encouraged to happen by the way the school is structured and by the culture the school encourages. Yeah, thank you for listening. Um, Thank you.